Senti a Roma. Listen to Rome. Today, a saxophone blows rouge over the cobblestones. Here, the faded yellows of accordion, guitar, and hand-tinted songs spool across the piazza. There, bells peal gold and umber onto the rooftops. Later, fluted silver tones blend with dancing green fountain song, aqua verde con verdi, until sapphire falls quiet from the night sky. Senti a Roma. Tonight, a small brass tingle of stars. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast. And thank you for leaning in. Some of you first-timers, some occasional dippers, others regulars. I'm glad you're each and all here for show 148 in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the bell-buoyed coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more fully, more lively, more poetically. In broadcast 147, we were along, inside and out, around smiles of all kinds, especially those that spring from a good feeling place, and the universally welcome effect smiles have on us, on others, no matter who or where or how young or old we are. Well, this week, what's ringing? From bells and chimes of all kinds and signifiers, sounding in the ears, to their vibrating and reverberatings in culture, in literature and elsewhere, to pealings and resoundings, tinglings and tollings that happen inside the self itself, of the heart, the mind, the spirit. So, let's jangle and chime into some cultural commentary, poetry, and inquiry I've arrayed for you, for us, on this theme. And let's begin in Maine, on a down east Maine harbor. One September, back in time. The mise en scène at the Island View Inn. An old couch warms itself by the fire, its leather cracking like hardwood over embers, as a bearded brown moose with candelabra antlers thrusts its head through the fieldstone chimney, sniffing the air and surveying the room below. To the right, a window pictures the stacks of feather-bedding clouds. A King Charles spaniel takes the sun warming in through the blue-screen door near a long Yankee breakfast table set for the view and polished like the now glinting bay. Far to the left sits a large jar of walking sticks that fan out like so many flowerless stems, with an out-of-time umbrella, black and matronly, nibbled by moths in 08 or 09, that breaks the pattern of whittled wood. Only the sound of the little brass clock ticking 12:30 above the still ship's bell counterpoints the silence. The mise en scène at the Island View Inn. Not sure if it's still there. I haven't been back in a long time. That was in 1998. Peter Pereira is this poem perfect pitch. It starts this way. F, the oven is an F, said Samantha Fogel, age 3. Oh, to hear the world with such clarity, such surety, to know the note of your breakfast chat is B-flat minor, that the 57 Chevy stalled outside the garage is a D, to recognize the apricot kitchen paint for what it is, F sharp, to understand the way you feel for him is G, definitely a G. And as you watch him descend the scale of the front steps to his car for work, the house quiets to an A. The arpeggio of last night's "Every Good Boy Deserves Favor" still ringing in your ears. Perfect pitch. Peter Pereira, thank you. That's from his collection, What's Written on the Body. From Botanica Online, so I was looking for interesting tidbits and other things. Bell, French cloche, German Glock, Italian campana. A hollow vessel usually of metal, but sometimes of horn, wood, glass, or clay, struck near the rim by an interior clapper or exterior hammer or mallet to produce a ringing sound. The acoustical structure of the bell sound is complex and has been completely understood only in modern times. Bells are widely distributed geographically and usually possess a clearly defined cultural status. Legends surround them, and beliefs abound concerning their special powers to induce rain or to dissolve storm clouds, to thwart demons when worn as amulets or when placed on animals, buildings, or conveyances, or to invoke curses and lift spells. The concept of their purifying action is ancient, as is their use in ritual, especially in the religions of Eastern and Southern Asia. I felt we also ought to lay out various kinds of bells to picture or ponder in your mind's eye or your mind's ear, or both. This is from popoptic.com, Popoptiq, on different types of bells. Bells date back to 2000 BC and were first rung in China. They were rung there for worshiping, making announcements, and for alerting people during times of danger. They also spread the use of metal bells to other countries from Japan, India, and Thailand for their practices of Buddhism and Hinduism. The Italian bishop named Polanius was the first to use them as part of Christian ceremonies, which spread among the monks in Italy and throughout Europe. The Catholics built enormous and louder bells during the Renaissance period, while the Gothic ushered in embellished and massive church bells. So, given their historical purpose, they're commonly hung at the top of a church tower so the sound travels to the entire town. Then there are carillons, which you may know of, right, housed in bell towers in municipal buildings and churches. And they're next to the largest pipe organs. They're the second largest. And they're usually comprised of 23 cast bronze bells, most of the time controlled by a keyboard. I didn't know that. There are handbells. There are school bells. Do you remember the sound of yours as a kid? Of course, there was the sort of electric one, but then way back in time, there was the big hand school bell. Maybe some of you are up in the upper reaches of time. Remember those. Bicycle bells. I have one. I have a Dutch bell on my bicycle. A friend in Amsterdam said, you got to have a Dutch bell on your bike. It definitely has a Dutch sound. I would play it, but it's in the other part of my home. Doorbells, of course. They were first actually mechanical and involved pulling a cord. Doorbells. Alarm clock bells. We know about the old-fashioned ones. All of them I find rather annoying until you can have like bird song in the morning. That's what I have in my alarm. The Bermuda carriage bell. Who knows about that? I mean, my friends listening in Bermuda know about that. It was rung to warn pedestrians, but you would find it on the floor of a vehicle. It was a bowl-shaped bell with a plunger that extended above the bell and operated with the foot. I actually think my friend Andy has one, Andy Reid, who got it on a trip to Bermuda once. So maybe I was with him then. How about the go-go bell? Originated in Africa, produces an extremely high note. I've never heard it. I'd like to hear that. It consists of 2 to 4 conical-shaped or truncated cones linked together by a U-shaped piece of metal. And they're all sized differently, and the sound it produces depends on what cone is hit. So if we listen to some traditional African Yoruba music, we could hear it. The altar bell. I remember that as an altar boy. I'm going to share a poem with you about that. Used to Catholic churches. The call bell. How about that? Do you know about that? I don't even think they exist anymore. They'd be on the old hotels on the counters when you were checking out or checking in, and they needed a bellhop, and the bellhop hopped to it when he heard the bell. I actually have one here. Just so happens. Front Mr. Goedecke's bags he's checking out. Yes, the call bell. Chimes, of course, wind chimes included, and cowbells, sleigh bells, standing bells. I'm not familiar with those. Used for making. Oh, I actually am. I was thinking of another kind of set of bells, but we would know some of these for making music, meditating, relaxing, and Buddhism makes use of them. You would think of the Buddha bowl or the Tibetan bowl, and of course channel boys. Here's another piece from Maine, from Sullivan, Maine, decades ago, and it's it's called Scudic. I wrote this in Sullivan, but it was over in Scudic that day. Scudic, foreground, smooth rocks, a caressing tide, a snow-breasted loon. Midground, a wide channel of feathered blue water. Background, a hopper lighthouse. Backdrop, a flat of pines, a bouldered jaw of ocean-bound land. Sound, the briny clang of an ancient bellbuoy. Well, here are some questions for you as we go about our theme of ringing. And what's ringing? What's your earliest memory of a bell or bells? Because your oral memory could be a visual memory or of ringing one yourself. What experience of bells ringing sometime in your life left an indelible impression on you? Have you ever heard the soul sound of cowbells, like of cows coming down from, say, an alpine pasture? It's quite magical. How about sleigh bells? Or a school bell ringing for recess? Or a ship's bell sounding the hour? Or a clanging bellbuoy in the ocean or a bay? What about a gong? How do you feel when you hear a bicycle bell or you ring one? What about listening to wind chimes? Aren't they lovely? Was there a time in your life you were saved by the bell, so to speak? And what was that experience? What really rings your bell? I'm curious about that. Do you have an interesting story about a bell you could share? If so, send me a note. I might like to reference it on a next broadcast. If you could ring a bell of any kind yourself, anywhere in the world, or any time, back in history, what and where would that be? And what's ringing inside your heart, or your mind, or spirit right now? David White, The Bell and the Blackbird. The sound of a bell still reverberating, or a blackbird calling from a corner of the field, asking you to wake into this life, or inviting you deeper into the one that waits. Either way takes courage. Either way wants you to be nothing but that self that is no self at all. Wants you to walk to the place where you find you already know how to give every last thing away. The approach that is also the meeting itself, without any meeting at all. That radiance you have always carried with you as you walk both alone and completely accompanied in friendship by every corner of the world, crying, Alleluia. Thank you, David White. Beautiful. His collection is one of his newest, is titled the same, The Bell and the Blackbird. On a note of soon emerging spring and birdsong, and how nature can be filled with jubilance like that, and we with it. This is a poem from Lichterfelde Ost, Berlin, Germany, March 2015. A Morning on Earth. It's an early spring morning of bell song and bird song, sun song and crocus song, tree song, green song, Erdenlied. Erdenlied, which is earth song. Yes, and we'll soon be having quite an earth song as spring arrives here, not too far away from this time. Well, there's the great German poet Friedrich Schiller wrote Das Lied von der Glocke, the Song of the Bell, or translated as the Lay of the Bell. And he was, of course, one of the great German poets. And I just thought I think it's one of his longest poems, 430 lines. And I'm just going to give you the very last verse of his poem. Give it to you in my best German I can, and then English. Jetzo mit der Kraft des Dranges wiegt die Glock mir aus der Grüft, dass sie in das Reich des Klanges steige in die Himmelsluft. Sie hebt, sie bewegt sich, schwebt. Freude dieser Stadt bedeute. Friede sei ihr Erstgelaute. Now, with the power of the rope, rock the bell from out the ground. Into the air let her mount up, into the heavenly realm of sound. Pull ye, heave. She doth move, doth wave. May she forebode us happiness. May her first chime utter peace. Vielen Dank, Herr Schiller. Have you ever heard of the great bell of Damazedi? This is from Wikipedia. Tells us about that. A bronze bell, believed to be the largest ever cast on 1484, 5th of February, 1484, by owner of King Damazedi of Hantawadi Pegu. And it was presented to the Shwe Dagon Pagoda of Dagon, which is Myanmar today. Well, his astrologer had advised him to postpone the casting because it was in the inauspicious time of the crocodile constellation, and he predicted the bell would not produce any sound. And after it was completed, it reportedly had an unpleasant tone. It was cast from 294 tons of metal, including silver and gold and copper and tin, 12 cubits high, 8 wide. And how about that? Imagine that. I guess it's still there somewhere. Maybe still ringing or ringable. Other famous bells. The Tsar bell in Russia. Largest that still exists, weighs 180 tons. Of course, Big Ben in London. You might know of that. And the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. Yes. And you may have your other favorites. Well, speaking of liberty, where else can we use the metaphor of the bell in our days, in our time, our lives, our thoughts? Well, one July 4th, here is how I did as I felt a great liberation unfolding after a great trial by, let us say, a life fire, the hard end of a long and once beautiful marriage and married life. This was July 4th, 2013, written out at the seaside out on Long Island in the South Fork. Freedom rings. Freedom rings in the great bell of my heart, in the green glass chimes of the in-rushing ocean, in the salt-tongued wind that sings through the summer lovely trees. It peals from the temples of my mind, from the towers of my dreams, from the flaring mouth of my deepest desires. Freedom rings. Vachel Lindsay, Davy Jones' Doorbell, a chant for boys with manly voices, every line sung one step deeper than the line preceding. Any skybird sings, ring, ring. Any church chime rings, dong, ding. Any cannon says, boom, bang. Any whirlwind says, wing, wang. The bellboy hums and roars, ding, dong. And way down deep, where fishes throng, by Davy Jones's big deep sea door, shaking the ocean's flowery floor, his doorbell booms, dong, 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 deep, deep down, clang, boom, boom, dong. Thank you, Vachel Lindsay. Isn't that fun? I wanted to share with you Edgar Allan Poe's classic poem from 1850. It's on the long side. I'm not going to read more than a little bit if I do right now, just to give you a taste. I remember it so well from my university days. It almost, reading the whole thing sort of makes you a bit dizzy. So many bells. But long before I knew I would become a poet. So I'll just maybe give you the beginning verse. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight, keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. If you're interested, you can read the rest, or hear somebody else read the whole thing. Well, back to Italia for a moment, but here to Venice, to Venezia, September 2007, and an indelibly felt experience of mine. Maybe you can feel into it through this poem, Il piove, the rain. It falls on nuns and noblemen, bakers and bankers, gondolieri e carabinieri, pesci e pescatori, on the stone faces of lions and virgins. It falls down and down under the waning moon and morning church bells, past the elegant shop awnings and the shuttered windows of sinking palazzos. It sings into the ears of songbirds and sleepers, and enters the veins of grand and humble canals in the calles, piazzas, and fondamentas. Il piove, il bello piove. The rain. Well, not just the bells in church towers, I was recalling myself, but and for us, but other sacred ones. And I'd mentioned, of course, being an altar boy. And this is a memory poem of mine harking back to my youth and Catholic days and serving at Mass. An altered boy, A-L-T-A-R-E-D. A cassocked and surpliced boy. A censer-lighting boy, a frankincense-wreathed boy, serving at prayer-quiet altars by the elbows of solemn priests, pouring cruets of wine and water into chaste gold chalices, ringing low-held bells, listening and prostrating in Latin, later in modern vernacular, local tabernacular, holding reflecting patens under the upright chins of kneeling supplicants, ready or not to receive the Holy of Holies sacraments, aware of the rituals, the rote ceremonials, but innocently skeptical of the actual spiritual. Amen. So, I think of all the spectrum of, you can have great jubilation from bells ringing, of towns being freed after the war, or weddings, some couples coming out of the church and the bells are ringing joyfully, and there could be very, very sad sounds of bells depending on the occasion, can fill us with that kind of sadness or shadow or foreboding or finality. And I wrote this back in 2002 as my dear, dear uncle Hugh was fading away with a terminal cancer. This is the clock tower and the pall-bearer. The solemn striking of the 11th hour from the village clock tower as I crossed the avenue alongside my uncle in his wheelchair, feeling just then like a pall-bearer in his funeral cortege. Everything alive but foreboding and slowly tolling, dead. I'll never forget that moment. Here's a sort of amusing poem from 1983. James Fenton wrote this. God, a poem. A nasty surprise in a sandwich. A drawing pin caught in your sock. The limpest of shakes from a hand which you'd thought would be firm as a rock. A serious mistake in a nightie. A grave disappointment all round. Is that all you'll get from the Almighty? Is that all you'll get underground? Oh, he said, if you lay off the crumpet, I'll see you all right in the end. Just hang on until the last trumpet. Have faith in me, chum. I'm your friend. But if you remind him, he'll tell you, I'm sorry, I must have been pissed. Though your name rings a sort of bell. You should have guessed that I do not exist. I didn't exist at creation, I didn't exist at the flood, and I won't be around for salvation to sort out the sheep from the cud. Or whatever the phrase is, the fact is, in soteriological terms, I'm a crude existential malpractice, and you are a diet of worms. You're a nasty surprise in a sandwich. You're a drawing pin caught in my sock. You're the limpest of shakes from a hand which I have thought would be firm as a rock. You're a serious mistake in a nightie. You're a grave disappointment all round. That's all that you are, says the Almighty, and that's all that you'll be underground. You have to take that one lightly, at least I do. I found that quite amusing, but maybe I could be a apocryphal former altar boy Catholic. I said lapsed Catholic once, but I think a Jesuit corrected me and said, isn't that redundant? It could be. I was thinking for us on the best bells in literature, and I found in theguardian.com several. There's, of course, Notre Dame de Paris by Victor Hugo, and with Quasimodo, the hunchbacked bell ringer, famous, lives in the belfry of Notre Dame and has been made deaf by the bells. He loves ringing them. Quote, long morning serenades which lasted from prime to compline, peals from the belfry for a high mass, rich scales drawn over the smaller bells for a wedding. But when he encounters the beautiful Esmeralda, he abandons the bells for a greater love. Well, if you've never seen, there's a classic, it's from the 30s, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Charles Laughton plays, the great Charles Laughton plays the Hunchback. Fantastic movie. Do see that if it interests you. There's the Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray. It's one of the best-known opening lines in English poetry is the sound of a bell ringing. Quote, the curfew tolls the knell of parting day. Well, his curfew was the traditional sound of the country parish, and since the days of William the Conqueror, the curfew bell had been rung to signal that it was time for bed. Peter Pan, how about Peter Pan and Tinker Bell, who communicates with the sound of a tinkling bell, which can only be understood by initiates. It's the fairy language. The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. And what else do we have? You may know some of those. You may have read others, but I just thought I'd spice in a couple. And then, of course, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Ernest Hemingway in 1937. This is from Goodreads.com. He traveled to Spain to cover the Civil War for the North American Newspaper Alliance. 3 years later, completed the greatest novel to emerge from the good fight, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Story of Robert Jordan, young American in the international brigades attached to an anti-fascist guerrilla unit in the mountains of Spain, tells of loyalty and courage, love and defeat, and the tragic death of an ideal. And here's a slice from that paragraph. In it he writes this: "How little we know of what there is to know. I wish that I were going to live a long time instead of going to die today, because I have learned much about life in these 4 days, more, I think, than in all other time. I'd like to be an old man to really know. I wonder if you can keep on learning, or if there is only a certain amount each man can understand. I thought I knew so many things that I know nothing of. I wish there was more time." For whom the bell tolls. Yes, I think that's one of his best. I think he might have even considered it one of his best of all. Edward Hirsch, late March. Saturday morning in late March, I was alone and took a long walk, though I also carried a book of the Alone, which companioned me. The day was clear, unnaturally clear, like a freshly wiped pane of glass, a window over the water, and blue, preternaturally blue, like the sky in a Magritte painting, and cold, vividly cold, so that you could clap your hands and remember winter, which had left a few moments ago. If you strained, you could almost see it disappearing over the hills in a black parka. Spring was coming, but hadn't arrived yet. I walked on the edge of the park. The wind whispered a secret to the trees, which held their breath and scarcely moved. On the other side of the street, the skyscrapers stood on tiptoe. I walked down to the pier to watch the launching of a passenger ship. Ice had broken up on the river, and the water rippled smoothly in blue light. The moon was a faint smudge in the clouds, a brushstroke, an afterthought in the vacant mind of the sky. Seagulls materialized out of vapor amidst the masts and flags. "Don't let our voices die on land," they cawed, swooping down for fish, and then soaring back upwards. The kiosks were opening, and couples moved slowly past them, arm in arm, festive. Children darted in and out of walkways, which sprouted with vendors. Voices greeted the air. Kites and balloons, handmade signs, voyages to unknown places. The whole day had the drama of an expectation. Down at the water, the queenly ship started moving away from the pier. Banners fluttered. The passengers clustered at the rails on deck. I stood with the people on shore and waved goodbye to the travelers. Some were jubilant, others were broken-hearted. I have always been both. Suddenly a great cry went up. The ship set sail for the horizon and rumbled into the future, but the cry persisted and cut the air like an iron bell ringing in an empty church. I looked around the pier, but everyone else was gone, and I was left alone to peer into the ghostly distance. I had no idea where that ship was going, but I felt so lucky to see it off and bereft when it disappeared. Thank you, Edward Hirsch, late March. This next one is a piece. It was paired with an image. It was a photograph by a professional photographer I knew back in time, and asked me to write poems to or pair that could pair with different images of his. And this was out in East Hampton, 2010. The title of the photograph was Deserted Motel Pool. That was the image. Very strong. And I felt into it poetically. And I wrote this. Vacancy. Travelers used to point their dark Buicks and DeSotos here, and sit whitely around a blue pool at the edge of a monotonous desert, until sunset painted the chrome of their fenders and grills with violet and verdigris, rose and citrus, and the ice chiming in their highballs and the swishes of their ceiling fans altered the emptiness. The Wind Chimes by Shirley Butner. 2 wind chimes, one brass and prone to anger, and one with the throat of an angel, swing from my porch eave, sing with the storm. Last year I lived 5 months under that shrill choir, boxing your house, crowding books into crates, from some pages your own voice crying. Some days the chimes raged, some days they hung still. They fretted when I dug up the lily I gave you in April, blooming strangely in fall. Together they scolded me when I counted pennies you left in each can, cup, and drawer, when I rechecked the closets for remnants of you. The last day, the house empty, resonant with space, the 2 chimes had nothing to toll for. I walked out, took them down, carried our mute spirits home. Thank you, Shirley Bootner. Larry Eigner, E-I-G-N-E-R, has 8 poems, says called 8 poems, but I'm just going to give you the first 3 or 2. Summer and winter trees near each other, lengths of time subside, shadows change toward what sleep may be. Dream the stars, islands of the south going round, and the sun returns. Always the thought of motion, the stir clearing the horizon to lie down on the earth. Red leaves scattered as the green comes to light. The wind bell heard as song. The wind buffets, hammering nails in the party wall, some birds absorbed in flight. Shadows, birds, wake up, birch trees in the wind's web. Before what minutes, exposition of mankind, stony light turned, how much the number, the vague soon again, what change in the parts. Thank you, Larry Eichner. There was a poem I wanted to read you, but I'm going to save it for another time. But you could look it up. It's by W.S. Merwin, The Song of the Trolleys. Put that aside. Who out there listening remembers the old telephones and ringers? I do. Growing up in New Jersey, I'm pretty sure I remember them and have a little nostalgia about those. Devin Johnston, telephone. A mockingbird perched on the hood of a payphone, half buried in a hedge of wild rose, and heard it ring. The clapper ball trilled between brass gongs for 2 seconds, then wind, and then again. With head cocked, the bird took note, absorbed the ringing deep in its throat, and frothed in a Boolean song. The leitmotif of bright alarm recurred in a run from hawk to meadowlark, from May to early June. The ringing spread from syrinx to syrinx, from Kiowa to Comanche to Clark, till someone finally picked up and heard a voice on the other end say Konza or Konse or Kansa, which the French trappers heard as caw, which is the only sound of a word for wind, then only the sound of wind. Thank you, Devin Johnston. Telephone. The Breather by Billy Collins. Just as in the horror movies, when someone discovers that the phone calls are coming from inside the house, so too I realize that our tender overlapping has been taking place only inside me. All that sweetness, the love and desire, it's just been me dialing myself, then following the ringing to another room to find no one on the line. Well, sometimes a little breathing, but more often than not, nothing. To think that all this time, which would include the boat rides, the airport embraces, and all the drinks, it's been only me and the 2 telephones, the one on the wall in the kitchen and the extension in the darkened guest room upstairs. The Breather. Billy Collins, thank you. I was musing on stories, experiences, inspirations about different people, ones involving bells. And here's one called Hinoe Uma, Fire Horse. It's Japanese for Takako Dart, over in New London, Connecticut. Well, she grew up in Kyoto alongside a temple, where as a little girl, as she told me, the monks would let her ring the temple bell. Just alone, I love that. Now, all sorts of other stories, so this inspired this poem about her. And she was born in the year of the Fire Horse, which was an interesting omen of a kind for a girl to be born under that sign. Fire Horse woman, wild-hearted woman, temple bell ringer, ritual tea maker, uchigatana, katana wielder, cutting edge up, child of wisdom, of wise men, freckled woman, face speckled with sunlight, firelight, soul light, woman of knowing hands, healing hands, body reaching, reading, restoring hands, flowing mane, free seeing eyes, free flying words, Fire horse. Out to her. I will let her know that I shared that tonight in case she's not listening. She is a marvelous body worker and spirit. And a fire horse woman. J. Wright. Love in the weather's bells. Snow hurries the strawberries from the bush. Star-wet water rides you into summer, into my autumn. Your cactus hands are at my heart again. Lady, I court my dream of you in lilies and in rain. I vest myself in your oldest memory and in my oldest need. And in my passion you are the deepest blue of the oldest rose. Stars circle me an axe. I cannot cut myself from any of your emblems. It will soon be cold here and dark here. The grass will lie flat to search for its spring head. I will bow again in the winter of your eyes. If there is music, it will be the weather's bells to call me to the abandoned chapel of your simple body. Thank you, J. Wright. And here's the biggest bell for my dear friend Isabel Chester on her birthday in 2021 that begins with a bell, B-E-L-L, and ends with a bell of another kind, a belle, B-E-L-L-E. The biggest bell is the bell that rings in the heart, is the bell that sings, that chimes, swings, resounds in the air of one's living, across all the places of loving, from the center of being. It's a peal that's ever clear, crown to mouth, waist to toe, the bright, ringing call of a beautifully made bell. And love out to her, and with that poem, my dear Isabel Chester. Jill Alexander Esbaum, Woodland, W-O-U-L-D. 5 a.m., 1/4 past. Distant chimes inform me this. A bell peal knells the mist, and sunlight's not yet bludgeoning, but some light gets blood going. Last night it was snowing, and now every path's a pall, though mine the only footfalls at this hour of awe. Above hangs a canopy of needle leaf, below the season's mean deceit that everything stays white and clean. It doesn't, of course, but I wish it. My prayers are green with this intent, imploring winter wrens to trill and begging scuttling bucks, come back. There's something that I lack. A wryneck, bullet beaks a branch. His woodworm didn't have a chance. What I miss, I've never had. But I'm not a ghost. I am a guest, and life is thirst at best. So do not strike me hard. I am too tender. I'm flammable as birch bark, even damp. Blue spruce, bee-eater, be sweeter to me. Let lark song shudder to its January wheeze, but give these hands a happiness just once. It is 1/2 and I'm cold. Another peal has told, and I've told the sum of my appeals. I need not watch for fox. They do not congregate at dawn, but I would, were I one. Thank you, Jill Esbaum. Now into some last sharings for this time together, for this ringing broadcast. This is a piece I'd forgotten about from 1990. I felt fitting around our theme and around me, your poet. Long rhymes. Long rhymes of chimes line the path to knowing me. Rainer Maria Rilke, Quiet Friend Who Has Come So Far, Part 2, Sonnet 29. Quiet friend who has come so far. Quiet friend who has come so far, feel how your breathing makes more space around you. Let this darkness be a bell tower and you the bell. As you ring, what batters you becomes your strength. Move back and forth into the change. What is it like, such intensity of pain? If the drink is bitter, turn yourself to wine. In this uncontainable night, be the mystery at the crossroads of your senses, the meaning discovered there. And if the world has ceased to hear you, say to the silent earth, I flow. To the rushing water speak, I am. Thank you, Rilke. Yeah, why not reflect beyond now, of course, but now too on those memorable notes you've experienced somewhere in your life, including ones that sound in or out of or over a place, a setting of stillness, of quietude, and that seem to harmonize with it or pay reverence to it. This was one of my moments like that in Central Park, New York City, on July 5th, 2016. Early summer morning after rain. Stepping into the city after a night-long rain onto cool, wet cobblestones, into full floating scents of moist earth, thriving green leaves, the lime musk of sycamore bark, the pale perfume of a run-wild rosebush, into quietly inviting feelings of freshness, lushness, everything washed down, washed clean, every planting overspilling, past puddles in the walking path, all clear and still, like the reservoir I circle softly round, but for the ripple of a bell from an old church tower ringing the morning hour across the water. Early summer morning after rain. And next to last, The Bell by Richard Jones. In the tower the bell is alone, like a man in his room, thinking and thinking. The bell is made of iron. It takes the weight of a man to make the bell move. Far below, the bell feels hands on a rope. It considers this. It turns its head. Miles away, a man in his room hears the clear sound and lifts his head to listen. The Bell. Thank you, Richard Jones. That's from his collection, The Blessing. And to close our time together, to ring out our program, this is from the Puget Sound, Port Townsend, Washington, September 2017. It goes on. When we've gone out with the tide, it goes on. The cool morning curtain of fog that lifts to sun and warmth, the lazy clang of the channel buoy, the fish and fishermen, sailors and ferry boats going about their business and pleasure, they go on. It all goes on. Well, thank you again for leaning in, feeling in, and for sharing these shows with others. Do feel free to post a link to this broadcast or the playlist to your social media. I also appreciate those who send me comments and words of affirmation, and those listeners who send donations to help support this work I do to enlighten and enliven you and others. If there's some theme you'd like me to shape a future broadcast around, send an email, colin@thepoetorialist.com. And what about your experience of this show on What's Ringing? I'd love to hear. To contribute in any amount, you can use Venmo to fivefold, FIVEFOLD, at pipeline.com, or by PayPal to the same email. Or you can simply send a check to me at P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. Or through my site, thepoetorialist.com, and the Donate tab. Yes, patrons can sponsor or host me seasonally as a working poet in residence for an agreed time and an agreed place in the U.S. or elsewhere in the world to create a new flight of poetic art and dedicate it to them. Email me to explore that. Meanwhile, you can hear all the broadcasts online on YouTube on the Floating Poetry playlist, and you can subscribe there too for notifications if you like. I hope you'll lean in soon again. Until then, dear listeners, may bells of beautiful kinds ring through your lives, your travels, your dreams. Pause to listen when they do, whenever they do, wherever they do. Let them resonate through your body, your spirit, your imagination or memory. And a resounding toast to whatever of note you may be gladly ringing out or ringing in. Well, goodbye for now, and good spirits. And here's Big Ben in London to ring us out.